Questions for reflection. Hezekiah was the 13th king of Judah. In the passage we heard in our first reading, the king had just heard of the treacherous and evil plans of the king of Assyria against his people. Being a righteous man, he went to the temple to pray. The words of his prayer are powerful, and they show the relationship Hezekiah had with the true God. And I quote, Yahweh, Sabaoth, God of Israel, enthroned on the winged creatures. You alone are God of all the kingdoms of the world. You made heaven and earth. Give ear, Yahweh, and listen. Open your eyes, Yahweh, and see. Hear the words of Sennacherib, who has sent to insult the living God. It is true, Yahweh, that the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations. They have thrown their gods on the fire. For these were not gods, but human artifacts, wood and stone, and hence they have destroyed them. But now, Yahweh our God, save us from his clutches, I beg you, and let all the kingdoms of the world know that you alone are God, Yahweh. And the Lord heard the prayer of this righteous king. He sent the prophet Isaiah to tell him that the Lord had heard his prayer and would intervene. We live in a different kind of political situation than ancient Israel experienced during the time of the kings. But the Lord still watches over his people wherever they are. And we desperately need righteous leaders in this difficult hour. And we need to pray for them. As Christians, we need to pray for the leaders of all nations in which we live. Praying for those in civil government was a regular practice in the early church, and it needs to be restored. As the Catechism reminds us, and I quote, the political community and public authority are based on human nature and therefore belong to an order established by God. Do we pray for our civil leaders? We should. The psalmist David reminds us that the Lord is a bulwark, and I quote, Mount Zion in the heart of the north, the settlement of the great king. God himself among its palaces has proven himself its bulwark. The word bulwark is used often in the Hebrew Scriptures. A bulwark is a defensive wall or shield. God is the greatest defensive wall or shield a believer has. He himself is a place of refuge. Is the Lord your bulwark? He wants to be. Ask him and watch what happens. Our gospel for today's Holy Mass is quite short. It really needs to be placed in its context. Sometimes our daily gospel readings are what is called a pericope, an extract, and today is one of those times. It's taken from the 7th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. Jesus is continuing to instruct his disciples in a series of teachings which follow after his having given them the Beatitudes. First, we hear verse 6 from the 7th chapter. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls in front of pigs, or they may trample them, and then turn on you and tear you to pieces. But then we skip down to verses 12 through 14. So always treat others as you would like them to treat you. That is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, since the road that leads to destruction is wide and spacious, and many take it. But it is a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Verses 7 to 11 are left out. What are they? How do they help us to respond? Listen. Ask, and it will be given to you. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. Everyone who asks receives. Everyone who searches finds. Everyone who knocks will have the door opened. Is there anyone among you who would hand his son a stone when he asks for bread? Or would hand him a snake when he asks for a fish? If you then, evil as you are, know how to give your children what is good, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him. Verse 6 is a warning about not committing profanation, which the Catholic Dictionary defines as, and I quote, the desecration of something holy by using or treating a sacred person, place, or thing as though it were not sacred, but merely secular or profane. Thus, profanity in speech is the use of God's name or of one of the saints without due regard for its sacred character. Then verses 12 to 14 are about entering the narrow gate. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 are all about how we are to be holy, set apart for the Lord, about how and what a faithful and full Christian life should look like. Well, the verses in between are what make it all possible. We need to pray in order to have the grace to respond to the instruction of Jesus. We need to seek, to ask, and to knock. And when we do, the Lord gives us the grace we need to reject profanation and to live holy lives. After all, we are all called to be saints, but we will never become saints without the grace of God.